going to be redeveloped as. It's always going to be that way, and that's how we're going to plan for it. In June of 2022, the future land use plan was amended to denote 3rd Street as a future commercial corridor. That was done at the direction of City Council. And at that time, the huge emphasis, and I think to this day, the emphasis has always been to help promote growth of the commercial community here in Polk City. Commercial development does generally drive higher traffic flows and could further impact the performance of 3rd Street. And so it's important to understand the future planning impacts of converting 3rd Street to a commercial corridor. I say all that because in June of 2022, the future land use plan was amended, but there were no planning documents updated to mirror that change that was made to the future land use plan. So the 3rd Street corridor and the role it plays in Polk City, as many of you know, it's the spine of Polk City's transportation network. It's that main thoroughfare through town. It provides access to several neighborhoods throughout the community, and it's a primary transportation segment for both passers through and the community as a whole. It's vitally important that that corridor is expanded or is planned for as the community continues to expand, and we balance the growth of Polk City with the needs of that corridor, particularly as it pertains to the northern extents of what we would recommend for this study that we'll discuss a little bit later. The future regional, now the regional park, I'm not going to call it future anymore because we've got phase 1 underway. But as that facility continues to develop and as we hope that it spurs growth in that area, the segments between Vista Lake and Northside Drive and between Hug and Vista Lake are going to become vitally important because we're treating the intersections in those areas, but the connections between those intersections may suffer because those intersections are improved. And then we want to safely provide that adequate service for the existing core business and residents. That's vitally important as we continue to grow, that we don't grow to the detriment of those that already exist. So things like the square, things like the existing neighborhoods down on Davis Street, the Deer Haven neighborhood, up here on Broadway, all of those existing facilities with commercial and residential spaces must be accounted for and must be accommodated as the community continues to grow along the 3rd Street corridor. So at this point, I wanted to revisit what it is that the City Council has as part of their CIP. We called it the 3rd Street Corridor Study. Really what it is it's a 3rd Street Traffic Impact Study. So it focused on 3 primary intersections: Bridge, Broadway, Davis, and Grimes. And what that study does is it focuses on the nodes of 3rd Street between Broadway and Bridge. It looks at those intersection improvements. How can we treat those intersections? How can we improve the intersections? What can we add to make those intersections themselves operate more efficiently? So things like traffic signals, signage, yield signs, turn lanes, medians, things of that nature that really help intersection performance, but may not necessarily consider the roadways in and out of those intersections. The deliverable for recommendations would be that turn lane or that intersection control. It's going to be a very, very technically and data heavy deliverable. It's going to come in the form of, and we'll pass around some examples once Wade gets talking about the expanded scope of a traffic impact study that's very table heavy, it's very diagram heavy, it doesn't have a lot to engage with, it's just a lot of numbers and a recommendation page as far as most people make it in those kinds of studies. So in that CIP estimate, we had that $24,000 without inflation. And then as part of next fiscal year, the City Council has a town square master plan programmed in the amount of $25,000. And it closely resembles a park master plan which the council should be familiar with. It includes minimal concepting for that transportation system surrounding the square, with the study focusing on the green space around the bandstand. So basically, if you imagine building 4 walls on those sidewalks that surround the square, everything in those 4 walls is what would be considered as part of that town square master plan, not the transportation network as a whole. And as I mentioned, you guys recently completed a master plan as part of the regional park planning process, so you guys are kind of familiar with that deliverable and what would be included in your CIP currently as a park or a town square master plan. And from there, I'm going to turn it over to Wade so he can talk through what we're recommending.
Thanks, Travis. Wade Griman with Snyder & Associates. Thanks for the opportunity to come up and present to you this evening. I'll talk a little bit about what the proposed scope study is first, or before I do that, I want to give you an analogy of where our minds are at. If you can think of the community as a dartboard, and the bullseye is essentially your town square, or maybe the intersection as it relates to this corridor, the intersection with 3rd and Broadway. So that is probably the most points that you're going to get and the most benefit that you're going to see as it relates to anything related to the corridor, because everything is funneling to and from that destination. That outer ring actually carries twice as many points as a normal shot inside the part between the bullseye and that outer ring. That outer ring is really where your limits for growth is being planned at this point. So that is the primary reason that we're looking at expanding the scope up to Hug and taking it down to Southside. As you transition from those rural areas into the urban areas, those speed changes are important. And in order to effectively communicate those speed changes, sometimes that results in side friction within the corridor. So as development occurs and continues to pinch into the corridor, that's when the speeds generally start to slow down because drivers aren't as comfortable. So it is essentially that outer ring that we're targeting all the way into the bullseye, and then what happens between there. So if you can take a mind's eye into the actual corridor itself, we divide those things into nodes, as Travis mentioned earlier, and those are the intersections or access locations and segments. The intersections or the nodes are generally where you start to introduce pedestrians, bicyclists, along with the vehicles. So those are very important to make sure that we're handling those safely, so that vehicles are paying attention, or the operators of the vehicles, as well as the pedestrians, because we don't want those things to intermix physically. The segments between the nodes are generally where we want to convey the traffic as efficiently as we can, safely still, but also to convey that in a quicker manner. So that's where the speeds generally are a little bit higher within the corridor, but the intersections are really our focal point. So this proposed study includes a conceptual plan of the cross section for the corridor, and that would be essentially based on what we hear from the public, but also based on what we hear from you, the decision makers, and how do we fold that into something that actually enhances the livability within the city and still provides those main functions of the corridor, which is conveying traffic, pedestrians, and bicyclists. It does include a traffic study component to it. The DOT just updated their counts within the corridor, actually within the city, in 2024, and the southern limits of this corridor at 415 down by Southside carries a little more than 10,000 vehicles a day. West Bridge carries a little more than 12. And then between Bridge and Broadway ranges between 7,200 and 8,400 vehicles a day, depending upon where you're at in the corridor. So about in the curve is really that peak movement. Broadway to the northwest carries about 8,500 vehicles a day. So there's a lot of vehicles utilizing this corridor as well as Broadway, as everybody in this room knows. It carries about 5,000 vehicles to the northeast, and then as you get out by Hug, it starts to drop off because obviously the development isn't as robust out there yet. But with the regional park that's coming, you're going to see those volumes continue to uptick. So the study, we want to take a look at the existing land uses. We want to take a look at the existing zoning, and we also want to take a look at what future land uses are being planned within the corridor in its entirety. And I want to say that the primary driver for expanding the scope up to Hug and south down to Southside is because those are your growth areas primarily. You do have a pretty heavy regional throughput on 3rd with destinations in the western suburbs of Des Moines as you continue west on Bridge, and then also on north side as you go over to Ankeny, and 415 as you go to Ankeny too. But that regional growth here locally is going to be probably your primary driver for added traffic that's going to be utilizing the corridor. So we really want to take care of that. We do want to do an inventory of any structures within the corridor that are over 50 years old, because if they are historically significant, those might be areas that we want to avoid with whatever improvements are done in Third. And if there's going to be redevelopment or infill development, we want to be cognizant of those sensitivities as it relates to environmental and social aspects. Now, when I talk about infill, I'll focus on, just for the sake of this discussion, between Grimes and Davis, essentially where Waldo stops just to the west. That area is owned by the city and is prime for development, infill development. And when you think about accessibility into that, generally, we don't like to put intersections into a curve on a roadway. But there is an opportunity, if you were to extend Waldo to the east to the corridor and maybe straighten those corridor legs from the northeast and from the south out and create a Y intersection of some sort there, that might help to entice development to happen in that area, maximize the value. We are going to be taking a look at the parking and the square circulation for traffic as it relates to this expanded scope, if approved. That was still part of the original scope, so I just want to make sure that we're carrying forward that same scope element with this new proposal. Concepting for streetscaping, essentially due to the importance of the spine that Travis alluded to, there are opportunities to maximize that visual component for the city. Streetscaping and gateway features can help to identify where you're at within the corridor, within the community, and help to provide some of that constraint or that side friction that I talked about to help maintain traffic flow and speeds. And then identifying any potential funding sources. So essentially the development of the final document is going to be something that would be to the level that you could use to help procure additional funding in the future, if in the event that you get to the point where you want to construct something. Travis is handing out a few examples, but this expanded scope fee ranges between 80 and 85. The reason there's a range there is depending upon how much level of detail we need to dive into the intersections within the corridor, with probably most of the focus being at Third and Broadway. So these are some images that you might stumble across as you go through those documents, and I'll leave those for you guys to keep, I guess. But this is an example of a comprehensive master plan. So you can see by this image up in Fort Dodge, this is called Central River District. Fort Dodge is going through a renaissance. They've got a lot of dilapidated properties up there. They've got a lot of significant assets that are underutilizing, like the river, like their downtown. So we're helping them to identify what those underserved uses are, and maybe revitalize those and redevelop those to help not only just change the appearance, but also to maximize the value of those properties. So we broke this area down into different sub areas to identify, what those future land uses might be, create those transitions from residential up to commercial up to maybe light industrial in this spot. And then what those public improvements might look like in order to facilitate and support those redevelopments. Two of the corridor plans that you'll see that are handed out, two of the three. One focuses on Central River District that I just pointed out. The other is Northwest River District, which is just northwest of Central River District. Northwest River District is a residential neighborhood of probably about 300 homes that have struggled for a long time. They've been underserved by the city for a long time, and they only have one access across the river. So much of the Northwest River District study is similar to this because everything is pretty much feeding to Third and or Broadway within the city. So we're going to be looking at this in similar manner, but it also focuses on some redevelopment. It focuses on some infill development. And it also identifies some streetscaping components to help maximize that spatial constraint that they have within that district. You can see parking on that typical cross section, but those are the types of graphics that you would see with this deliverable. And those just only help to tell the story to procure future funding. So as it relates to the infill development, I just wanted to point this out. This is part of that Northwest River District. We took a look at 5 blocks within the corridor that the city had already purchased, and they raised all the buildings because they were dilapidated, they were abandoned, and they were residential. And so the city purchased those, and they wanted us to take a look at what those spaces could actually accommodate for residential redevelopment. So we laid out 5 different blocks, and then we drilled down into specifics of each block, what that looks like from similar types of development, and then what zoning requirements would be, setbacks and so forth. And we did all this in concert with Planning and Zoning Commission. So anything as it relates to redevelopment within the corridor, we would strongly encourage that collaboration with Planning and Zoning so that we're consistent with the future plans for the city. But also they're going to be vitally important as it relates to collaboration with you, the decision makers. Access management plan would also be part of this study, and making sure that the other stakeholders like the DOT, specifically at the south end, are on board with what's being proposed. But when I talk about the nodes and the segments, having a consistent space on the node locations is important when conveying that driver expectancy. So when you introduce pedestrians and bicycles, we want to make sure that those are in evenly spaced locations so that the drivers can anticipate where they're coming in and where they're not. So that would be part of this too. And that also would be something that we would want to make sure is collaborated with planning and zoning, because that might help to dictate what those future developments might look like along the corridor. So just in comparison of the original scope that was presented, how long ago? A couple of years ago. That original scope did have a lower cost. And when I say that, I'm combining both the square as well as the corridor. But the corridor was from Bridge up to Broadway. So essentially those 4 nodes were the primary focal points, and the segments weren't really paid attention to a lot. It also does not include a whole lot of public engagement. So that's one of the differentiators for this too, is as you continue to grow, and you're going to see a significant amount of growth, especially with that park. There's a lot of things that come along with that. More homes, a lot of in and out traffic over the weekend, so forth. So with limited and no public input planned with that original scope, I think it's going to be important to engage the public to gather their feedback, and so that you can make informed decisions going forward too. It does lack some visuals as it relates to future infrastructure plans that you might want to construct. So this expanded scope would help to convey that visually to whomever those grant application reviewers would be. Benefits of the revised scope is basically just the inverse of what I just mentioned about the primary or the original scope. The comprehensive document for the spine of the transportation system, and that's really what it would be considered, is the spinal cord that feeds the energy to and from the body of the city. Provides that development guidance for any infill development, so future land use, future zoning, setbacks, so forth and so on, and then how that folds in with concepts related to streetscaping, gateways, the bike trail that's being planned within the corridor, and how that translates into the regional connectivity. And with that, I guess I'll open it up to questions.
Council? Nick, you look pensive.
I have some thoughts. So just for starters, cost-wise, we're talking about 85,000 for the expanded scope as opposed to 50,000 for the combined 3rd Street original interested section and Town Square. I guess my biggest question is, what is the expanded scope going to tell us that we need to do other than alter speed limits as people approach town? I mean, we don't really control 415 very much. There's not a whole lot we can do without much more DOT input that's going to be above and beyond what we're doing here. And with what we've already got planned building to the north, it seems like we've got a reasonable idea of how we're going to be moving the corridor to the north and how we're going to address issues that direction. So what other than altered speed limits are we going to learn about the additional north-south sections?
You want me to take that? Okay. I would say that it's going to position you much better for that future funding. The infrastructure costs, the construction of anything within that corridor are going to be significant. And it's probably going to be beyond the fiscal means that the city has today. So you've got to have some outside help to get this done. There's multiple modes that are considered within this, but as it relates to the prior study, it really focuses on just those intersections and doesn't really pay much attention to the segments between. So it's a redevelopment of the corridor. It also is going to provide you some infill development concepts in the areas that aren't addressed with that original scope as well. So it stops, the original stops at Bridge to the south. The DOT is fully aware of the curve that's coming in, some of the site constraints that come in with that. This would take a look at that at a pretty heavy level, I would say, and bring them into the fold so that that collaboration continues at the south end. And the north end, north and east, northwest is probably going to be your significant growth areas anyway. South is limited because of the core land, but there are some parcels, I would say south of like Casey's on the west side, just south of South Side Drive, that could be redeveloped over time. Not saying that it needs to happen now, but as those pressures continue, this corridor would take a look at those things outside of the Broadway to Bridge segment. So I don't know if that answered your question.
As a follow-up, so are you saying that in order for the DOT to fund any improvements, we have to go through you guys with this study?
No, I'm not saying that at all. I mean, the DOT and the city could collaborate and come up with a mutual benefit opportunity or plan through a cooperative agreement, and that's happened before. They're going to rely upon a lot of the technical aspects associated with the intersection geometry and what the corridor is supposed to look like. You're approaching volumes that are going to be pushing to added through lanes. If you have more volumes coming into the city, you're going to be really constrained unless there's a comprehensive corridor look. You get into the 10 to 12,000 vehicles per day on any corridor, you're starting to stretch a two-lane facility. Especially if you've got, every 300 feet an intersection, and those typically, try to slow down traffic and provide congestion because they're trying to get in and out of the corridor too. So that's really that long-term vision for the entire corridor. And given the fact that the south leg is carrying about 10,000 vehicles a day south of Bridge, and northeast of Broadway is 5,000 something, 5,100 or something. But since that's going to be most of your growth, I would hesitate to stop at Broadway because that's going to be the one that's going to see most of the growth in traffic.
Okay, so I'm still left with Nick's original question. If we know those counts and we know the direction of the growth, what are we gaining here?
Well, it's basically a layout so that you can define what those access points are going to be, what is going to be contained within the right-of-way, what those spatial constraints might look like, and also give you a concept of if you wanted to incorporate streetscape amenities or gateway features that are specific to those regions within the corridor, that's what this would improve or would include as well. It also does open it up to the public engagement aspect. So getting active public engagement is part of this as well.
From a funding component, when you start looking at north of Bridge, now you're on local network. Plans like this that I've seen through with like the MPO for STBG funding positions those communities to get those funds. It's a plan for design for construction. So the communities that have these types of studies and have the data ready, especially on the local roads, are positioned better at the MPO for funding. And that's where we've fallen short, you know, in some of the recent submittals. Not that we didn't have bad projects, but a project like this to me seems much more regionally important than say like a Whitetail Ridge Parkway, where it's a good idea, but there's just nothing there yet.
And Jeff kind of led me to what I was gonna say is, this expanded study sets the table for more robust and more concise and probably better performing grant applications for this corridor as you move forward. I know we're always looking for candidates for STBG funding, and, you know, in a week, I can work up a exhibit that says this is what we want to do, but how strong is that funding application if we don't have the actual studied and thought through concepting behind it? That's kind of the question I would ask.
Have we had any conversations about Third Street with either the MPO or the DOT recently?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, I didn't think so.
I think in some of the previous meetings, talking about 415, yes, but not specific to the need, just that they have an understanding that it's one of our major thoroughfares that connects up to 415.
Yeah, and one of the recurring things that you'll see in my engineering updates memo is the reference to a Broadway, or not, a bridge corridor study. That should really, I should probably change the nomenclature to that to be a Highway 415 within Polk City corridor study. They feel that there's significant challenges that they don't have firm answers for, basically from your city limits all the way to the bridge.
So if we were to rewrite it that way, wouldn't they be more willing to participate in that study, similar to the one we did, whatever one for the apartment complex
Highway
out there?
415,
Yeah.
44th. Mhm.
I mean, I that was rhetorical because we haven't asked them, but
It's a possibility, I would say.
Are you asking, just because I need clarification, are you asking to write it so that it's about bridge as well?
well, potentially. I mean, if they want to, if we want to study enough of this area and we expand it a little bit further and they're willing to go halvesies with us, then yes. If the answer's no, then no. I mean, it's a funding oriented question.
Mandy?
I don't have anything right now.
Jeff Savage? Rob, anything else?
I think I know the answer to this, but is there any way, not just inside of a study like this, but is there any way to assign a rationale for the why on the traffic? Like, I'm going through because I live in Grimes and I work in Ankeny, or vice versa, or I'm going to work at, like, some of those identifying commuter traffic versus pass-through traffic versus whatever, you know, leisure traffic. I don't know what. I think I know the answer, but we're not going to get any of that information, are we?
As far as splits of through traffic versus local?
Yeah, or even more granular than that, but if we could get that, that would be good to know.
Yeah, I think in reviewing the DOT's counts, they do have some turn movement counts that we could factor into the study of the intersections themselves. But as it relates to the through traffic, it's going to be, that would be a much broader study and more in-depth, like an origin destination type study.
Yeah.
Where you are actually looking at a larger model per se. There are certain things that we could get from the MPO and utilize that information. I think that goes out to 2050 modeling, or 2045, 2050. We would absolutely be in concert with them to get whatever modeling that they have in the granular detail that we could dive into, so.
We can also request streetlight data from MPO as
Yep.
well. That would provide a gross assessment of through traffic. Wouldn't be exact, but it's just one more layer of the onion to unpeel.
And I think as Wade kind of alluded to, what we're recommending is not all the bells and whistles. We think it's the right size at the right time for this community. Polk City is at a point where I think you're at a very important point in your history where you've got, this is not supported by anything, but that first trunk sewer you guys put in, I think could drive a lot of additional traffic to Third Street. And I think having a planning document that shows us not only what we need today, but also what we need for future growth, future infill, and future redevelopment is vitally important. And I think since June of 2022, I think that planning document has been missing.
And so the document then is going to provide future transportation data, traffic data based on the land use changes that we're anticipating, especially out on the north side of town, which I think is something it's hard for us to grasp right now, that the commercial and residential development that will likely occur with the development of the sports complex, as well as the strong push that Ankeny is making that direction, is going to make the north side of Polk City prime for development. And that's a lot of rooftops. That's got to come down this direction. And so, and that's the question. That is the intent of this study, is to include that as well.
Correct. And there's nothing to say either that if something, your future land use plan changes in the future, you get this great, amazing development that doesn't quite meet what we used in this, there's nothing to say that that developer wouldn't be responsible for updating this document. It would be a living, breathing document that would continue to evolve as the community evolves as well.
At their cost. That's a concern of mine, because adding costs to parcels that have been a struggle to develop, because the timing of this is never going to be perfect, right? It's great now if nothing happens, or if the things we plan happen in the first, year or two or whatever. It's going to be turned on its ear the first time a significant development happens differently than we had planned. And not knowing that is the $1 million question on when you do some of these things. So
I would argue that this study can even be an economic development driver for us. It provides data to potential development in areas that maybe we haven't really looked at. So if they understand what potential growth opportunities are out on, say, the north side of town, and they understand what the city might do to bolster up the transportation network, that provides them an incentive to take a harder look at the community.
Okay. We have input from council members, so I think what we need to do is decide if council wants to proceed with expanding the scope of the study. So why don't we just go down the line like we normally do and go from there? So Rob, let's start with you. We can start somewhere.
I'll no in pencil like I used last time.
All right. Jeff?
Yeah, I think we should do the study.
Jeff?
Yes.
Mandy?
I think yes. I think the question is timing, because to Rob's point, you don't want to, we're going to do this and then we have no, I don't know, you want it to be reasonably close to when you expect things to start happening. But I do believe that something like this is important, because you look right here too, like the Third and Davis property. If through this study we determine that we could never put a turn lane there and you're stuck going in and out, then that helps us to understand what might be able to use or not use that parcel. So I do think it is an economic development aspect. I think looking through some of these, the more comprehensive information, I think will be helpful. So my long-winded, yes.
All right. Nick?
Mine's going to be at least as long-winded. the original scope of this study was to figure out how we could help redevelop that Third and Davis property, as well as what was feasible for that section of bike trail that we were looking to put in, as well as how that particular corridor was set to grow. Again, I'm not convinced we are going to learn anything useful from the study. But in the end, if it also sets us up to get better grant funding for overall corridor redevelopment, I'm a hesitant yes. Yeah.
Okay.
We
Thank you.
can though, right?
So just one point of clarification. So this is from Southside Drive to Hug Drive?
Yep.
And it now will include Bridge Road?
We could revisit that with the DOT to see if they can bring some funding to it, if they want to include bridge as part of the 415 aspect, yeah. I mean, if that's what you want us to do, we can come back with that.
Agree?
Are we terminating at Hug or 126?
We added at Hug right now for this, knowing that the north leg still feeds into Hug, so, you know, we got to look at it as a transition, but.
Okay, so it looks like we're good with moving forward with this, so thank you very much.
Mr. Mayor,
Wade and Travis, yeah,
what did we decide
we decided to.
for Bridge?
Oh,
Are we going to,
well,
are we gonna do further, reach out and get some information and then
Yes.
come back? Okay.
Yeah,
yes. Okay, thank you.
yep, thank you.
So that is the only item on our agenda. Item number 2 then is adjournment, so I'll ask for a motion and a second to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. We're adjourned until 6 o'clock.